The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the jagged canyons of New Mexico, turning the earth into a shimmering sea of heat. Sarah Whitmore guided her mule-drawn wagon through the rocky pass, her face streaked with dust, her bonnet limp from sweat. The year was 1874, and she'd been alone for nearly 2 weeks, ever since bandits had killed her husband and taken their supplies. All she had left was her wagon, a handful of flour and beans, and her will to keep moving. She didn't know where she was headed anymore, only that she had to survive. The silence of the desert unnerved her. No birds, no wind, only the groan of her wagon wheels. When the mule suddenly stopped and twitched its ears, she sensed movement before she saw it. From the cliffs above, shadows shifted, then broke into figures. Apache riders, painted for war, descended with shouts that echoed through the canyon. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She gripped the reins and shouted for the mule to run, but the creature froze, terrified. Arrows struck the dirt in front of her. Within seconds, she was surrounded. The leader dismounted, a tall man with skin the color of sun-warmed copper and dark braids that fell across his chest. His face bore the calm of someone used to command. His eyes, however, were hard as obsidian. He held a long ash spear, its tip gleaming in the light. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Please," she rasped. I'm not a soldier. I mean no harm." He didn't respond. He stepped closer, studying her face. Around him, his warriors shouted in their tongue, laughing, pointing to the wagon. One jerked the cover aside, finding the sack of flour and tins of beans. He barked something sharp and fast in Apache, and the men's laughter died. The leader raised his spear and leveled it at her chest. Sarah froze. She had seen that look before, the cold readiness of death. She wanted to pray, but no words came. Then something in her mind snapped awake, an instinct born not from courage but from sheer desperation. "Wait," she cried out, her voice cracking. "Let me live. I can cook for your warriors." The Apache paused. The desert wind seemed to hold its breath. He looked at her again, truly this time, as if trying to read her soul. "Cook?" he repeated, his English broken but clear. "Yes," she said quickly. "Food, I can make food. For your men." She gestured wildly toward the wagon. "Flour, beans. I know herbs, wild ones. I can make something good." A few of the warriors laughed, but their leader didn't. He lowered the spear slowly until the tip touched the ground. His expression softened, though his voice remained edged with suspicion. "White woman cook." "For Apache?" Sarah nodded, her breath shaking. "If you let me live." The man studied her another moment before giving a short order. 2 warriors moved forward and seized her by the arms. Sarah gasped, but didn't fight. She'd rather be a prisoner than a corpse left for vultures. The leader gave a final command, and her wagon was turned toward the horizon. As they began their march, Sarah dared to glance back at him. He was already on his horse, watching her with an unreadable expression. The sun dipped lower as they rode deeper into the wild lands of the Apache. Sarah's heart pounded not only with fear, but with the faintest spark of hope. She had no idea what waited for her in their camp, only that her quick words had bought her one more sunrise, and somewhere behind those fierce eyes of the man who spared her, Chief Taza, fate had just taken its first breath. The Apache camp sat hidden in a hollow of red cliffs and mesquite trees, its smoke rising faintly against the evening sky. Sarah had never seen anything like it. Rows of hide tents shaped like cones, children darting around fires, dogs barking, and women grinding corn on flat stones. Every eye turned to her as she was led in. This dusty, frightened white woman in torn calico, her hands bound, her hair escaping its bonnet in tangled curls. Her guards pulled her to the center of the camp, where a ring of warriors sat eating around a large fire. The scent of roasted meat drifted in the air. Chief Taza stood nearby, his spear resting across his arm. His presence was unmistakable, quiet but commanding. As Sarah was pushed to her knees, the laughter and chatter around the fire stilled. "She says she can cook," one of the warriors said in Apache. Sarah didn't understand the words, but she could read the mocking tone in his grin. Another man laughed and held up a half-burned rabbit on a stick, waving it toward her like a joke. Taza raised his hand for silence, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah. "You cook," he said in halting English. "Now." Sarah blinked. "Now?" He pointed toward a pile of food near the fire, a few rabbits, wild onions, corn, and a sack of beans from her own wagon. His face was unreadable, but she caught the faintest trace of challenge there, like he wanted to see her fail. Her heart thudded. The faces around her were full of doubt, and the Apache women whispered among themselves. She swallowed her fear and nodded. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll show you." They untied her wrists and she rolled up her sleeves. Her hands shook as she gathered the ingredients, but she forced herself to focus. Years of feeding her husband and trail workers had taught her to improvise with whatever she had. She boiled the beans with wild herbs, roasted the rabbit slowly over coals, and used corn to make rough cakes of ash bread. The air soon filled with the warm, rich smell of cooking. One by one, the Apache stopped what they were doing. Even the children drifted closer, sniffing the air. Sarah worked silently, every movement careful and deliberate. She dared not meet their eyes, only the fire's. When the food was done, she stepped back, breathless and trembling. "It's ready," she said softly. Taza approached first. He tore off a piece of the bread, dipped it in the stew, and took a bite. The warriors leaned forward, watching his face. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his jaw relaxed and a spark of surprise flickered in his eyes. He took another bite, then another. Without a word, he handed the bread to the man beside him, who eagerly tasted it and nodded. Soon the entire circle was eating, murmuring in approval. The laughter had turned into a low hum of satisfaction. Sarah stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. When the last of the food was gone, Taza looked at her again. "You cook good," he said simply. She gave a small, nervous smile. "I told you I could." The chief's lips twitched almost into a smile, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He turned to his men and spoke sharply in Apache. They nodded, then motioned for her to follow. She was taken to a small corner of the camp and given a blanket by an older woman who said something kind in a language Sarah couldn't understand. As night fell, the firelight flickered across Sarah's face. She was alive, fed, and for the first time in weeks no longer alone, but she knew her safety depended on her next meal, and on the unspoken question in Chief Taza's eyes. Could he trust a white woman in the heart of Apache land? Morning broke cold and golden over the Apache camp. The sun climbed over the mesas, spilling light through the thin smoke of dying fires. Sarah woke to the sound of voices, children laughing, horses whinnying, and the rhythmic pounding of corn being ground by the women. For a brief, drowsy moment, she forgot she was a prisoner. Then the scent of smoke and the harsh Apache tongue brought it all rushing back. An older woman entered her tent, one of those who had watched her cook the night before. She motioned for Sarah to follow. Outside, Chief Taza stood waiting beside several warriors. His arms were crossed, his face grave. When Sarah approached, he pointed to a pile of baskets and bundles. "You go," he said in his rough English. "Wood, roots, water, you bring back." It wasn't a request. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Alone?" He shook his head. "2 men go with you, watch." So it was a test. A way to see if she would try to run. She nodded slowly, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "I understand." They gave her a small knife and 2 woven baskets. The 2 warriors, one young, one middle-aged, followed her as she set out toward the brush beyond the camp. The landscape stretched wide and endless. Sandstone ridges, thorny shrubs, and dry arroyos where faint trickles of water hid beneath cracked mud. Sarah kept her eyes down, gathering wild onions, edible roots, and kindling wood, trying not to let her fear show. She could feel the men's eyes on her, sharp and unblinking. Every time she moved too far ahead, they made a sound. A grunt. A word she didn't understand, to remind her they were there. After an hour, she reached a bend in the canyon where the air smelled faintly of rain. She crouched beside a small stream, scooping water into a gourd. That's when she heard a soft sound behind her, a child crying. Turning, she saw a boy no older than 6, barefoot and trembling, half hidden behind a rock. His small arm was cut, blood drying in streaks down his skin. His eyes were wide, frightened but curious. Sarah glanced back at the 2 warriors. They hadn't noticed the boy. They were arguing quietly near the trail. She hesitated, torn between fear and instinct. Finally, she knelt and spoke softly. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice low and gentle. "I won't hurt you." The boy didn't understand her words, but he seemed to understand her tone. Slowly, he stepped closer. Sarah tore a strip from her skirt, wet it with water, and cleaned his wound. He winced but didn't pull away. Then she took a bit of her bread from her pocket and offered it. He hesitated, then took it with both hands, eyes shining with gratitude. When the warriors noticed, they called out sharply. The boy darted away, clutching the bread. The younger guard barked something at her, angry. But before he could say more, the older one stopped him, pointing toward the boy disappearing into the camp. A brief silence passed between them. Then both men turned and gestured for her to follow. Back at camp, Taza was waiting. He looked at the baskets full of roots and wood, then at her face. "You find what I ask?" "Yes," she said, lifting the bundles. He nodded once, then added quietly, "And you help my son." Sarah froze. "Your son?" He pointed toward the small figure now sitting by a woman's tent, the same boy she had bandaged. "You do not run. You help him." For a long moment, Taza held her gaze. Then, without a word, he walked away. The warriors whispered that the white woman had passed the chief's test. That night, as the fire crackled and the boy peeked shyly at her from the shadows, Sarah realized something had changed. She wasn't just a captive anymore. She had begun to belong. Days passed, then weeks. The Apache camp that had once terrified Sarah began to feel strangely alive around her, its rhythm steady, its people fierce yet bound by deep loyalty. She still slept in a separate tent, watched by guards, but she was no longer treated like an enemy. Each morning she rose before sunrise, helped the women grind maize, and cooked for the warriors before they rode out. Her hands toughened from work, her cheeks browned from the desert sun. The children had stopped staring at her in fear. Some even smiled when she passed, but it was Taza who unsettled her most. He rarely spoke, but whenever he was near, the air seemed to grow still. She would feel his gaze before she even looked up, measured, unreadable, as if he were trying to see what lay behind her calm smile. He no longer treated her as a prisoner, yet there was always an unspoken tension between them. One morning, Sarah was tending the fire when sparks flared unexpectedly, catching her sleeve. She gasped and tried to pat it out, but the flame bit her skin before she could. Pain shot up her arm. She dropped the pan she was holding and fell to her knees, clutching her hand. "Sarah!" The voice came sharp, commanding, and close. Taza appeared at her side in seconds. He grabbed her wrist, yanked a water skin from his belt, and poured cool water over the burn. She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. His touch was firm but careful, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You must not panic," he murmured in English. "Fire listens to fear." She looked up at him, startled by the softness in his voice. His fingers brushed lightly against her palm as he wrapped the burn with a strip of clean leather. For a heartbeat, she forgot the pain, the warmth of his hand, the scent of smoke and cedar from his skin. It all made her pulse quicken. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded but didn't pull away immediately. Their eyes met, hers uncertain, his intense. A long silence stretched between them before he finally stood and turned away. That night, the Apache gathered for songs and stories around the central fire. Sarah sat quietly near the edge, her bandaged hand resting in her lap. The women passed her a bowl of stew, and one of them smiled kindly. Though she didn't understand the words of the songs, she felt the heartbeat of them, the unity, the strength, the sorrow woven into every note. Taza's voice joined in from across the fire, low and deep. She found herself watching him, the flames painting his face in shifting light. For a moment he looked up, catching her gaze. Neither looked away. The next morning, an older woman, Taza's aunt, she learned, approached Sarah with a quiet smile. "You make good food. You care for Chief's son. You burn hand. Chief worry." Sarah blinked. "He worried?" The woman nodded, eyes twinkling. "He see more than warrior. He see heart." The words left Sarah flustered. She turned back to her cooking, but her thoughts drifted. That evening, when Taza came to taste her food, she found herself smiling without meaning to. He noticed, and this time he smiled back, faint but real. Whispers spread through the camp after that. Some of the women teased her gently. Others warned her in hushed tones that the chief's path was not meant for her. But when the desert wind blew that night, carrying sparks from the fire across the sand, Sarah felt something shift deep inside her. It wasn't fear anymore, it was warmth, fierce and unfamiliar. For the first time since her husband's death, she wasn't just surviving. She was feeling alive again, and the fire within her burned just as bright as the one she had lit for his warriors. The raid came just before dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of galloping hooves and the echo of gunfire bouncing off the canyon walls. Shouts tore through the camp, men calling to one another in Apache, women rushing to gather children. Smoke drifted through the rising light as Taza's warriors mounted their horses, weapons gleaming. Sarah stumbled from her tent, heart pounding. "What's happening?" she cried to one of the women. The woman's eyes were wild. "Soldiers!" she shouted, motioning frantically toward the ridge. "White soldiers, come!" The very ground seemed to shake beneath the thunder of horses. Taza rode to the front, his long hair whipping in the wind, spear in hand. His eyes found Sarah in the chaos. For one suspended moment, they looked at each other. Then he turned his horse and vanished into the dust. Hours passed like a nightmare. Sarah stayed behind with the women and children, clutching the chief's son close. Every sound, every shout made her flinch. When at last the noise faded, silence rolled over the valley. Only the caw of distant ravens broke the stillness. Then came the riders returning, battered, bloodied, and carrying the wounded. Sarah ran toward them. "Taza?" she shouted. "Where is he?" A warrior pointed to a horse limping at the rear. Taza hung from the saddle, his arm bleeding freely, his body swaying. She gasped and rushed forward as he fell to the ground. "Get me water," she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. His skin was hot, his breath shallow. The wound across his shoulder was deep, torn by a bullet or blade. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely, pressing cloth against the bleeding. He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze hazy with pain. "We win," he murmured, his English slurred. "Camp safe." "Not if you die," she said, her throat tight. The Apache stood watching, uncertain. No one moved until Sarah shouted again, "I need fire. Boil water now." Her voice carried such authority that even the warriors obeyed. Through the long afternoon she worked without rest, washing the wound, grinding herbs, binding it tightly. Taza drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time his eyes fluttered open, he saw her face, determined, gentle, streaked with sweat and dust. Once he murmured something in Apache she couldn't understand. By nightfall, the fever broke. Exhausted, Sarah sat back against the tent pole, her hands shaking. Taza stirred, his eyes clearer now. "You stay," he whispered. "You saved me." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't about to let you die, Chief." A hint of humor flickered in his gaze. "Chief listens to white woman now?" She met his eyes, the corners of her mouth lifting. She saved his life. For a long while they said nothing. The camp outside had quieted. Only the crackle of the fire filled the air. Taza reached out weakly, his fingers brushing hers. She froze, feeling the weight of the gesture, small but filled with unspoken meaning. He didn't let go. When he finally slept, Sarah stayed beside him. She dipped a cloth in cool water and wiped the sweat from his brow. At some point her body gave in to exhaustion, and she fell asleep leaning against the edge of his bed, her head resting near his arm. When dawn came, the first light filtered through the hide walls, and the warriors saw them there, their chief and the white woman side by side. By midday, whispers ran through the camp. They began to call her Taza's heart woman, though no one dared say it within his hearing. But when he woke and found her hand still in his, Taza didn't correct them. He only watched her sleeping and thought, a fire can start even in the ashes of war. The days that followed Taza's recovery passed in a strange, delicate rhythm. The camp healed along with him. Wounds were bound, tents repaired, laughter slowly returned. But beneath the surface, tension hummed like a distant storm. Word had spread beyond the canyon. U.S. soldiers were gathering again, moving south with orders to crush the Apache once and for all. Scouts brought news of patrols sighted less than a day's ride away. Sarah heard the whispers as she carried water from the stream. Every time she passed a cluster of women, they fell silent. Every time she met a warrior's gaze, she saw questions, fear, anger, loyalty, doubt. She knew what they were thinking. Why was the white woman still here? That evening, as the crimson sun bled across the horizon, she found Taza sitting alone by a fire outside his tent. His shoulder was still bandaged, his spear laid across his knees. He looked weary, though his eyes were sharp as ever. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "Chief cannot lead from blanket." She sat across from him, folding her hands. "The men talk," she said after a moment. "They're afraid. They think the soldiers will find us soon." Taza nodded slowly. "They will. Soldiers hunt like wolves. Never stop." He paused, staring into the flames. "We have fought too long, Sarah. My people are tired." Her heart ached at the sound of her name in his voice, soft, almost tender. "Then leave," she urged. "Go deeper into the mountains. Hide until they pass." He shook his head. "No, this land is ours. The bones of my fathers sleep here. She swallowed hard. If you stay, they'll slaughter you. Taza looked up, meeting her eyes. You want to save us? Yes, she said fiercely. All of you, especially the children. He studied her for a long, quiet moment. The firelight carved shadows across his face. Would you still cook for my warriors, he asked softly, if it meant never seeing your people again? Sarah froze. The words struck her like a stone to the chest. What are you saying? I ask if your heart belongs to them, he said, nodding toward the horizon where the soldiers would come from, or to us. She looked away, her throat tight. I don't belong anywhere anymore, she whispered. My husband is gone. My home is gone. And if I go back to the towns, they'll call me a traitor for even speaking to you. Taza's expression softened. He rose slowly and came to stand beside her. The faint scent of cedar and smoke clung to him. Then maybe here, he said quietly, you find a new home. Sarah felt her breath catch. The fire crackled between them, throwing gold against his dark skin. You don't know what you're saying, she murmured. Your people would never allow it. He smiled, a small, knowing smile. They will not choose for me. For a heartbeat, the air between them shimmered with words unspoken. His hand lifted slightly as if he meant to touch her face, but he stopped, letting it fall back to his side. Before she could speak, a young warrior rushed up, his chest heaving. He said something urgent in Apache. Taza's expression hardened instantly. What is it? Sarah asked. Soldiers, he said grimly. Not far. Coming fast. He turned to her then, his eyes fierce. You stay hidden. If I fall, you run. Sarah shook her head. No, I won't leave you. But Taza was already striding away, shouting orders to his men. As the camp erupted in motion, Sarah stood by the fire, trembling, torn between the two worlds that now claimed her heart, one by blood, the other by love. And for the first time she understood. She could never truly belong to either. The next morning dawned gray and silent. A thick fog rolled through the canyon, muffling the sounds of camp life. Sarah felt it deep in her bones. Something terrible was coming. The warriors sharpened their knives in silence, and even the children played without laughter. Taza had gone before sunrise with a small band of scouts to track the soldiers' trail. Before leaving, he had gripped Sarah's hand tightly and said, Stay close to the women. If we do not return, you go north. Follow the river. She had nodded, though fear choked her voice. You'll come back, she whispered. You have to. Now as the fog thickened, Sarah gathered herbs by the stream, trying to steady her hands. The old woman who often helped her, Taza's aunt, had gone to tend to the horses, leaving Sarah alone. She didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Don't move, a voice barked. Sarah froze. 3 men in blue uniforms emerged from the mist, rifles raised. Their faces were hard, their coats bearing the insignia of the U.S. cavalry. One of them, a lieutenant with a scar along his jaw, grabbed her arm roughly. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. A white woman with the savages. Sarah's pulse thudded. Please, she stammered. You don't understand. Oh, I understand plenty, he sneered. They took you captive. You've been living with them. His eyes narrowed. Unless you've gone native yourself. She shook her head fiercely. No, I only stayed alive because I helped them cook, tend their wounded. They're not monsters, he laughed coldly. You can convince the major of that if he doesn't hang you first. The soldiers bound her wrists and dragged her back toward their camp at the edge of the valley. She stumbled through the rocks, her boots tearing, her mind spinning. When they pushed her into a tent, the lieutenant leaned close and hissed, Tell us where the Apache are hiding, and maybe we'll see you safely home. Sarah's stomach turned. I don't know, she lied. He slammed his hand on the table. Don't lie to me. You've been cooking for them, sleeping among them, you know where they are. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. You'll kill them all. I won't help you. The lieutenant's face twisted with anger. He struck her across the cheek. The blow sent her sprawling, her head ringing. Think about it, he snarled. We'll talk again when you're ready to be reasonable. They left her tied in the corner of the tent, her cheek throbbing. She bit back tears, pressing her forehead to her knees. She could have saved herself, could have pointed them toward the canyon and been free by sundown. But the thought of Taza, the way he had looked at her that morning, made the choice impossible. Night fell. She must have drifted in and out of consciousness because when the gunfire started, it felt like a dream. Shouts echoed outside. followed by the thunder of hooves and the whoosh of arrows slicing through canvas. The tent flap burst open, and there he was, Taza. His face was streaked with blood and dust, his eyes blazing. He cut through her ropes in one swift motion. "Can you run?" Sarah's heart leapt. "Yes." He pulled her to her feet and dragged her into the chaos. Flames consumed the soldiers' camp. Apache warriors rode through the smoke like ghosts, fierce and unstoppable. Gunshots rang around them as Taza shielded her with his body, leading her toward the horses. When they finally reached the open desert, they didn't stop until the gunfire had faded into the distance. Sarah clung to him, her body shaking. "You came for me," she whispered. Taza turned his head slightly, his voice low and rough. "You did not betray us. I would cross death itself for that." In that moment, under the blood-red moon, Sarah understood what loyalty truly meant. It wasn't something spoken. It was something proven, in pain, in fire, and in love. The night after their escape, the desert lay still and silver beneath the rising moon. Sarah and Taza rode until the horses staggered, then stopped beside a dry riverbed where mesquite trees bent like ghosts. Both were exhausted, covered in dust and blood. Sarah slid from her horse, her legs trembling, and knelt by the sand, cupping handfuls of water from a shallow spring. Taza joined her, breathing hard. His arm was freshly bandaged, but she could see blood soaking through. "You're hurt again," she said softly. He brushed it off. "Not bad. Let me see." Before he could protest, she unwrapped the leather. The wound was deep, still bleeding from battle. She tore another strip from her dress and pressed it gently against the cut. Her hands were steady, but her voice shook. "You risked your life for me." He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You risked yours first." Their gazes locked, two worlds colliding in silence. The air between them felt alive with something neither could name. For days afterward, they hid in the hills, surviving on dried meat and cactus fruit. Sarah helped tend to the wounded, while Taza sent scouts to watch for soldiers. Each evening, when the sun sank behind the cliffs, they sat by the fire together, saying little but feeling everything. He began teaching her his language, soft words murmured under the stars. She struggled with the sounds, and when she mispronounced them, his laughter, rare and quiet, filled the air like music. "Try again," he said one night, pointing to his chest. "Shash Taza," she smiled. "Chief Taza." He shook his head. "Not chief. Man." She tried again, and this time the word came out right. He grinned, a spark of pride in his eyes. "Good, now you," she touched her chest. "Sarah." He repeated it slowly, as though tasting the syllables. "Sarah." The way he said her name, gentle, reverent, made her heart flutter. Another evening, she brought out a scrap of paper and a stub of charcoal from her wagon. She drew a few letters on it. "Here," she said, smiling. "I'll teach you something, too." He frowned, curious. "What this?" "Writing," she explained. "Your name." She wrote it carefully. "Taza. See? This says you." He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "You make sounds stay on paper," he said in awe. She laughed softly. "Exactly." He tried to copy it, his large fingers clumsy around the charcoal. The letters came out crooked, uneven. "Not good," he muttered. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "Because it's you." Their eyes met again, and the laughter faded into something deeper. Neither moved for a long while. The fire crackled softly, painting gold across their faces. Later, as the wind picked up and the night grew colder, Taza draped his blanket over her shoulders. When she shivered, he sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Why you not fear me now?" he asked suddenly. She looked up at him. "Because I see you," she whispered. "Not the warrior. Not the enemy. Just the man." Taza's hand hesitated, then touched her cheek lightly. "You see too much," he murmured. "You will not go back." "I don't want to," she said before she could stop herself. The words hung between them like a vow. Taza leaned forward slowly, his forehead resting against hers. "You asked to live because you could cook," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "But you have fed more than my warriors. You feed my soul." Her breath trembled, tears burning her eyes. Under the desert moon, with only the fire and wind as witnesses, two hearts from enemy worlds finally spoke a language that needed no words at all, the language of love. For a short while, peace found them. The sun rose golden over the desert, and Sarah began to think the world might let them live in quiet. She cooked over the fire, mended clothing, and learned the Apache songs the women sang at dawn. Each day Taza visited her camp before the sun was high, bringing her a carved trinket or a handful of berries, and each night they walked along the ridges until the stars burned bright enough to guide their steps. But peace in the Wild West never lasted long. One morning a scout thundered into camp, his horse foaming with sweat. "Soldiers," he said breathlessly in Apache. "North Valley. Less than a day." Taza's face darkened. "How many?" 24 at least. "With wagons." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. "The U.S. Army." They must have tracked her wagon's path from the trading post, perhaps thinking she was still their captive. Or worse, that she'd joined the enemy. "Taza," she whispered. "They'll kill you if they find us." He turned to her, calm but grim. "If they find you, they'll think I took you by force. They'll hang me before I can speak." She stepped closer. "Then we run," he shook his head. "No. My people will not run again." That night the Apache camped silently among the rocks, preparing for what might come. Arrows were sharpened. Horses were readied. Women gathered children and supplies. Sarah helped pack medicine and food, her hands shaking. When she found Taza standing alone by the cliff's edge, looking down into the moonlit valley, she went to him. "There has to be another way," she said. "You could hide." He turned to her, eyes fierce. "Hide and let them burn our homes again? Take our land? No, I fight." She touched his arm, desperate. "Then I fight with you." His expression softened for the first time that day. "You are brave," he murmured, cupping her face. "But you are not made for war." She looked up at him through tears. "I'm made for you." For a heartbeat his resolve faltered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as though he could shield her from what was coming. "If I do not return," he whispered against her hair, "go south. The river will carry you. Promise me." She shook her head, clutching his shirt. "Don't ask me that. Promise." At last her voice broke. "I promise." When dawn came, the desert filled with dust and thunder. The soldiers rode hard through the valley, rifles gleaming in the sun. Taza and his warriors waited, hidden among the rocks. The first gunshot shattered the stillness. Then came a roar of answering fire. Smoke curled upward, echoing through the cliffs. Sarah crouched in the canyon below, hands over her ears, praying, trembling, whispering his name over and over. "Taza, please." Hours passed. The gunfire faded to silence. Then hoofbeats. A horse appeared, staggering, its rider slumped forward. Sarah ran before she even thought, catching the reins as Taza nearly fell from the saddle. Blood soaked his chest, his face pale beneath the dust. "No," she cried, lowering him gently to the ground. "No, stay with me." He tried to smile, his voice barely a whisper. "We won." Tears streamed down her face. "Don't talk. You need help." He lifted a trembling hand, brushing her cheek. "You kept promise?" She nodded through sobs. "Yes, but I'm not leaving you." He tried to speak again, but his voice broke, the words lost to the wind. Sarah pressed her forehead to his, her tears falling onto his skin. Around them, the desert was silent again, beautiful and cruel like the love they had fought for. She would not let him die alone. Not her warrior, not her Taza. As the sun set red over the blood-stained sand, she whispered, "You let me live, and now I'll fight to keep you alive." The night after the battle, the desert glowed beneath a crimson moon. Smoke rose from the valley where the soldiers had retreated, their wagons half burned, their pride in ashes. Taza lay beneath a mesquite tree, his body weak, his breath shallow but alive. Sarah refused to leave his side. She cleaned his wounds, tore her last clean cloth into strips, and boiled herbs she had learned from the Apache women. The other warriors came to her for food and medicine, calling her the white woman who would not die. But she only cared about the man lying before her. "Taza," she whispered, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "You're safe now." "You hear me?" "Safe." His eyes fluttered open. "You stayed." "I told you," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll never leave you again." He smiled faintly, though pain lined every feature. "War is done for now." Sarah nodded, though she knew peace in the Wild West was a fragile thing, a whisper on the wind. Yet at that moment, with his hand in hers, it felt eternal. For 3 days she nursed him. The women brought her food and taught her how to mix crushed yucca roots into a healing paste. The tribe accepted her quietly, part out of gratitude, part because their leader had chosen her. One evening, when the stars burned white and fierce above them, Taza sat up, weak but determined. "Come," he said, holding out his hand. "There is something I must show you." She helped him walk to the ridge above their camp. Below them, fires flickered in a crescent. The tribe gathered, singing a low, steady rhythm. "They sing for the ones who did not return," Taza said softly, "and for the living who must carry their memory." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They sing for you too." He looked at her and his voice grew quieter. "And for you? You saved many today." She shook her head. "No. You're the reason any of us are still breathing." He smiled faintly, gazing out toward the dark horizon. "Before you came, I fought because I had to. For land, for my people, for pride. But now—" He turned back to her. "Now I fight because I have something to live for." She swallowed hard, heart aching. "And what's that?" "You." For a moment words failed her. The desert wind swept around them, carrying the scent of smoke and sage. Then she reached up and touched his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "You let me live that first day because I said I could cook," she whispered, smiling through tears. "But now I think you just didn't want to eat alone anymore." He chuckled softly, wincing at the pain. "Maybe so." Then he took her hands in his. "The tribe will move soon, to the high plains. You could go back to your people. Back to your world. They will not stop you." She looked down at their joined hands, dusty and scarred but strong together. "I have no people there anymore," she said quietly. "Only ghosts." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then stay. With me." Her answer came in a whisper, but it carried the weight of a vow. "Always." He drew her close, his forehead resting against hers. Around them, the singing rose higher, echoing off the cliffs. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the sound fill her heart, the heartbeat of a new life, born from war and forgiveness. And as the firelight flickered over them, she realized that the girl who had once begged for her life by saying, "I can cook for your warriors," had become something greater, not a prisoner, not a stranger, but the woman who had taught an Apache leader how to love, and who had found in the wild heart of the desert the place she was always meant to belong.